Hi everyone, and welcome back to our second video in our overview of Miami University's Clinical Psychology doctoral program. In this video, we're going to be talking about research and scholarly engagement. Although our program admits students to the program as a whole, we do work under a very strong mentorship model. What this means is that each student is assigned a primary research advisor. This is the person that you're interviewing with, and works within that research mentor's lab group. Each of our tenure track faculty members has an active lab, and you can see in our word cloud a number of the different kinds of overlapping processes that we all study. Now, despite the fact that we have a very strong mentorship model, I would argue that we also have an extremely collegial department in which collaboration is greatly encouraged. So it's the case that several students in my own lab and certainly in other labs may be working in a second lab with a different faculty member, getting experience learning how to do the research in that lab, where there may be points of overlap. There's a lot of cross-collaboration, both within our clinical psychology area, but also across other areas of our department. So several of our clinical students, for example, work with individuals in our brain cognitive and developmental area, or in our social area as well. So there's a lot of cross-collaboration, and instead of thinking about the labs in our program as silos, I like to think about our program much more as sort of a screen door, where students are sort of working in and between multiple different labs. Let's talk a little bit about the research miles that all of our students are expected to hit along the way in our program. So students in their first 2 years are expected to complete a master's thesis within our program. Students at the end of year 1 provide a short overview of their master's thesis idea to the entire clinical area in a case conference presentation, and then by the end of year 2 are set to defend their thesis. Now, I would say that half of our students on average are collecting new data for their master's thesis, whereas the other half are using archival or pre-existing data. If you're a student who's coming in with a pre-existing master's and you came from a program in which there was a thesis, then you would be able to waive this requirement for our program. And we can talk about the details about that if this applies to you. All of our students then are expected to complete the comprehensive examination by the end of year 3. There are 3 options for the comprehensive exam in our department. These 3 options in our area include writing a grant proposal, which would be equivalent to something like the NIMH's Predoctoral National Research Service Award, or what's called an NRSA predoctoral grant. The other option that a lot of students choose to do is writing a systematic literature review that would be equivalent to something you would see in like Psychological Bulletin or Clinical Psych Review. There is also a third option as well. Now this option is technically an option, but since I've been DCT, no one has chosen this option. But this is a traditional written closed book exam over 2 days. In this case, you would come up with a reading list that would be approved by your committee, and then you would sit and write for 2 days. As I mentioned, most students, actually all students, have taken the choice of either writing the grant proposal or doing the systematic literature review. And both of those, the grant and the systematic review, tend to facilitate that third milestone, which is the dissertation. So typically students propose the dissertation in the 4th year, and we require our students to do so by the end of the 4th year in order to apply out for internship the next year. Most students in this situation are collecting new data, although that's not always the case. And I would say that about 50 to 60% of our students are defending prior to going on internship. In addition to these 3 milestones, there are additional pieces of scholarship that our students engage in. And we have a number of resources to help students with their research. So one of the things that we have for sure is a large undergrad research pool. Typically in a semester we have anywhere between 500 to 700 students who are undergraduates enrolled in Introduction to Psychology that serve as participants in studies. So if that's of use to you and your research, that can be done. The other piece of this large undergraduate major that we have is that we have a lot of students who are extremely excited to be working in the lab. So there's a lot of opportunities for mentoring of research assistants in each of our labs. I would say that most of the clinical faculty have anywhere between 5 to 25 research assistants in their lab working at any given time. For example, on average, I typically have about 9 or 10. Others may have a few more or a few less. There's a lot of opportunities for mentoring within the program itself. There's a couple of formal opportunities. Something listed here, like I've mentioned, is the DUOS, which stands for Doctoral Undergraduate Opportunities for Success. What this program is that a student who is post-master's can work with an undergraduate student to propose a project and then apply for funding for that project to work together. And a number of our students in psychology have been very successful in this program. We have a lot of other resources for research on campus. We're well equipped in terms of our research and computer labs. We have access to obviously most of major software packages, typical things like SPSS and SAS, but also MATLAB. Obviously R is open source. Many of us use things like M+ to do structural equation modeling in our work. We have access to things like Qualtrics and E' and other types of software that could be used for collecting data. In addition to sort of these general resources, we have high levels of training in psychophysiological assessment. I would say that the kind of most advanced of these is our Center for Psychophysiology. There's a number of faculty who are doing work with EEG, including Dr. Keel within the clinical area. There's several of us who use peripheral types of physiological measures. And so we have the PARC, which is the Peripheral and Affective Research Center, which has ways to measure things like skin conductance and heart rate and respiration, as well as EMG. So we have a lot of those opportunities. Myself and also Dr. Keel do some work with what's called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is a low-cost brain imaging technique. So there's opportunities for students to be trained in these psychophysiological assessments if that's of interest. In addition, we support our students both in collecting data and conducting research, as well as disseminating research at places like conferences. So typically for research, students have access to about $300 to $600 or can apply for this amount for things like master's and dissertation projects. And that we also have roughly about $400 to $700 of money for travel each year. We actually were very recently privileged to have a donor donate a large sum of money to the department with the specific purpose of supporting graduate research dissemination and travel. And so this is really exciting. We'll be able to up that ability to help offset costs for students to travel to conferences to present their work. In recent years, all of the faculty, the tenure track faculty, including the incoming new 2 faculty, have been PIs or co-PIs or co-Is on active grants. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've pulled in over $3 million worth of funds as faculty, which is really exciting. So there's a lot of active research going on. And you can see some of the places that have served as funding agencies here for us, including places like the NIH in the state of Ohio, but also the United States India Educational Foundation. We've had a lot of great grants working through these different agencies. In addition, our students have also been highly successful in the last 7 years or so in securing predoctoral fellowships and grants. So we've had 2 NIH NRSAs, so those National Research Service Awards, and this is really exciting because these are the first 2 on our campus ever. We've also had 4 National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowships, what are called NSF-GRFs. In our clinical area alone. And our students are also really successful at securing other fellowships and awards through different foundations, different agencies, local donor groups to support both their research and their scholarship. Our students are highly research active in addition to all the coursework and clinical training that they receive. So our students are presenting at research conferences, usually traveling back when we could do that in the before times. And on average are giving 2 to 3 times in a typical year are presenting posters, talks, symposia, those kinds of things. And our students are publishing, on average, 1 to 2 research projects in a given year. Now, obviously, this is an average, and so some of our, more of our students are doing these kinds of things towards the latter half of their graduate career in years 3, 4, and 5, when they've got a little bit more foundation underneath them. And so what that means is that many of our students in those years are actually publishing 2 or 3 things in a year, whether it be peer-reviewed journal articles or research reviews or book chapters, those kinds of things. So our students are being highly successful, publishing in great outlets, disseminating the wonderful work that they're doing. Many of these are stemming straight from master's theses and comprehensive exam projects, but also what I would call sort of side projects, or the additional projects that students are working on in addition to those milestones. And finally, you can just sort of see a number of the research conference outlets that our faculty and our students are presenting at. Kind of big places like the American Psychological Association or ABCT or APS, but also smaller conferences including the Midwestern Psychological Association, or conferences that are geared towards specific kinds of samples or populations that we study in those ways. So you can see a list of these. Our students are trained in science practitioner model, which means that we really do value teaching our students not only how to be good consumers of the research evidence for use in their clinical work, but also how to be those who create that knowledge for the greater good. All right, so this wraps up our talk about research activities within our program, a brief, broad overview of those things. We'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about clinical opportunities.